It was just another busy afternoon in the city, the kind where everyone seemed to be in a hurry, rushing past each other without a second thought. The sun was blazing, reflecting off the windows of the police precinct, and inside, Officer Donovan strutted around like he owned the place. His uniform was spotless, his badge gleaming, and his chest puffed up with pride. Everyone knew him, or at least, they thought they did. Arrogance was his trademark, and he made sure nobody forgot it. Then he saw a man walking calmly through the precinct doors. Jeans, worn jacket, hands tucked in pockets, eyes steady. No flashy movements, no loud announcements, just quiet confidence. He looked ordinary. Too ordinary, Donovan scoffed, thinking this was just another civilian trying to waste his time. "Hey you, what's the big idea standing around here like you belong?" Donovan barked. "This is a police station, not a playground." The man didn't flinch. He just nodded slightly and walked closer. His presence was almost magnetic, though Donovan didn't notice yet. He was too busy puffing up his chest, making sure everyone around saw who was in charge. Donovan leaned forward, jaw tight, and swung a hand toward the man in a half-threatening gesture. "Step out of line, buddy, or you'll regret it." His colleagues chuckled nervously, sensing a confrontation brewing, but the man didn't step back. He just waited, calm, silent, still. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, though no one knew why. Donovan's smirk widened. This will be easy, he thought. Just scare him. Assert dominance. Show who's boss. And with that, he swung at the man, aiming for intimidation. For a brief, heartbeat-long moment, time slowed. Everyone gasped. The swing was fast, aggressive, and completely unnecessary. But the man barely moved. A faint smile appeared on his face, a smile that carried a weight Donovan couldn't understand yet. And in that very instant, before anyone could even react, a single thought hit Donovan like lightning. I have no idea who I just tried to hit. The room went silent. Eyes widened. Phones appeared in hands. People whispered, and the air seemed heavier. Something had shifted. Something had gone terribly wrong, and Donovan's arrogance had just walked straight into a storm he didn't see coming. The precinct was buzzing with the usual activity, phones ringing, clerks typing, officers walking in and out with files under their arms, but there was now a subtle shift in the air, an unspoken tension that made even the veteran officers pause for a moment. Everyone had noticed the swing. Everyone had felt the sudden, strange silence that followed. And most importantly, everyone had noticed the calm figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the room. Steven Seagal. He looked ordinary at first glance, jeans faded from years of wear, a simple jacket over a plain shirt, shoes that had seen better days. But there was something in his posture, in the quiet control of his movements, that made people instinctively step aside, giving him room. His eyes scanned the room, steady and unshaken, absorbing the chaos like a mirror. Donovan, on the other hand, was a storm of ego. He tightened his jaw, his chest rising and falling with arrogance. Who does this guy think he is? He thought. How dare he walk in here like he owns the place? He smirked at his colleagues, expecting a few nervous chuckles or nods of agreement, but noticed that their smiles were hesitant, almost fearful. That should have been a warning, but arrogance doesn't notice warnings. "Listen here," Donovan said, pointing at Steven, his hand shaking slightly, betraying a hint of unease. "You don't just waltz in here, acting like you own the place. Step back before I make you step back." Steven's gaze never wavered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, a check, crisp and clearly of significant value. He handed it over calmly, without a word, without a glance at Donovan. The officer snatched the check and unfolded it, expecting perhaps a prank, a fake document, anything to justify his authority. His eyes widened as he read the numbers. $500,000. "Nice try," Donovan sneered, his face still a mask of confidence, though the first cracks were appearing. "You think a check like this impresses me? This isn't a game. Step aside before I call for backup." The room was silent again. Clerks and officers who had been working at desks paused, glancing nervously at the unfolding drama. A few of them whispered under their breaths, speculating about who this man could be. Their curiosity was tinged with unease. Something about him demanded attention, even if they didn't understand why. Steven Seagal didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, calm as a lake, and allowed the arrogance to play out. He could see it, the subtle twitch in Donovan's hand, the faltering confidence in his eyes. Arrogance is loud, but it's fragile. And Steven knew exactly how fragile it was. Donovan's face darkened with irritation. How dare this man not react? How dare he just stand there, silently, while the officer tried to assert dominance? He opened his mouth to speak, to deliver some crushing verbal blow. But nothing came out. His colleagues were now fully watching, their expressions a mix of curiosity, fear, and anticipation. The sense of suspense in the room was nearly palpable. In an impulsive move, fueled by pride and frustration, Donovan dropped the check into his hand, waved it in Steven's direction, and flicked it toward the trash bin. "Let's see if your little fortune can survive the fire of reality," he said, striking a lighter. The flame touched the paper. Smoke curled upward, and for a moment, the room seemed frozen. Steven's eyes followed the movement calmly. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his lips. Not of anger, but of quiet certainty. He didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He simply let the arrogance play itself out. "Sometimes," he said softly, his voice calm but cutting through the tension like a knife, "arrogance blinds the eyes that should see." Donovan froze mid-motion, caught between triumph and disbelief. The smoke curled, the paper burned, and yet the calm presence of Steven Seagal remained, unshaken, almost untouchable. The staff whispered again, some reaching for their phones. Others simply stared, unable to look away. And then, as if on cue, the quiet observer near the back of the room, an older clerk who had been silent through all of this, furrowed his brow. Recognition flickered across his face. "Wait, I've seen that face before," he muttered under his breath, though no one was close enough to hear. The fire in the trash bin was almost a metaphor, arrogance consuming itself, while patience and silent power remained untouched. A tense moment passed. Seconds stretched longer than minutes. Everyone in the room felt it. The confrontation was far from over. And yet, no one realized just how quickly the tables would turn, or how completely the arrogant officer's world was about to shift. The smoke from the burning check curled into the air, filling the precinct with a faint smell of charred paper. Officer Donovan froze mid-motion, staring at the faint curl of smoke as if it were a warning. The room had gone utterly silent. Even the hum of fluorescent lights above seemed to pause. Steven Seagal remained calm, his posture perfect, his gaze steady. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his hands. He simply looked at Donovan with a quiet intensity that made the arrogant officer's bravado feel brittle, like thin ice over a deep river. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to echo against Donovan's pounding chest. The young officers at the back of the room were wide-eyed, some clutching their phones, some whispering to each other. "Who is this guy?" one murmured. He's not normal," another replied. Even the seasoned officers were unnerved. The way Steven carried himself was not just calm, it was commanding. Donovan straightened his uniform, trying to regain control, but his confidence had begun to crack. He jabbed a finger toward Steven. "You think standing there silently is going to intimidate me?" He stopped mid-sentence. The words caught in his throat. Something about the way Steven was looking at him made him pause, made him feel small. Steven finally spoke, his voice soft but cutting, like a razor through velvet. "Sometimes arrogance doesn't just blind you, officer. It makes you forget your place." Donovan's jaw tightened. The nerve. The gall. But before he could respond, Steven took a single step forward. Not a threatening one. Just a calm, deliberate step. The entire room seemed to shrink around him. People instinctively moved back, giving him space, as though some unspoken force had carved out a radius of respect around him. Donovan's pride snapped like a thin wire. "You think you can walk in here and—" He swung his fist again, faster this time, aiming directly at Steven. It was a reckless motion, fueled by anger and humiliation. The room held its collective breath. Steven didn't flinch. His hands moved with fluid precision, deflecting the swing just enough to avoid confrontation, yet firm enough that the movement carried a silent lesson. Donovan's arm jerked back in shock, not from pain, But from the sudden realization that his opponent was far beyond anything he had expected, a faint gasp rose from the crowd. Phones whipped out. The younger officers whispered, That was nothing. But it's like he controlled it all. The older clerk at the back leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Recognition was dawning. I know that face. Donovan stumbled slightly, his arrogance faltering. For the first time in his career, he felt unsure, exposed, and completely unarmed in the face of silent authority. He could feel the sweat on his brow, the tightening in his chest. The fear was subtle but real, the fear of someone who understood power without needing to yell. Someone who could end a confrontation without ever raising a hand. Steven's eyes softened slightly, almost imperceptibly, and he spoke again. It's not about force, officer. It's about respect. Something you seem to have forgotten along the way. The burning check now sat forgotten in the trash bin, ashes curling up slowly. The moral weight of that charred paper hung in the air, mirrored in Donovan's crumbling posture. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He had nothing to argue with, nothing to justify his arrogance. The silent authority in front of him left him speechless, and then the whispers started to spread through the room. Officers and clerks alike began murmuring to one another. Isn't that? Could it really be? The older clerk at the back, the one who had remained respectful throughout, stood straighter, recognition fully settled in his eyes. Steven didn't rush the moment. He let Donovan's ego collapse at its own pace. The lesson was not in a punch, not in a fight. It was in calm dominance, in silent control. Donovan's colleagues began to record, some with fear, some with awe. They understood that what they were witnessing was more than just a confrontation. It was a public unmasking of arrogance. Finally, Donovan's knees buckled slightly, his chest heaved. He had tried to assert dominance, to humiliate, to prove he was in control. Instead, he had exposed himself, and the man before him, Steven Seagal, remained unshaken, untouchable, the eye of a storm that had consumed only the pride of a single officer. The older clerk whispered under his breath again, barely audible. That's him, Steven Seagal. The word spread quickly, but Steven's calm gaze never wavered. In that instant, everyone realized the game had changed. Donovan's arrogance had been met not with anger, but with quiet authority. And authority like that, it could not be challenged. It could only be respected or regretted. The precinct had settled into an almost unnatural silence. Phones were still in hands, but instead of recording chaotic action, people were watching, waiting. The air felt thick, charged with anticipation. Something monumental had just occurred. Though most of the officers didn't yet understand the full weight of it, Donovan stood frozen near the center of the room, sweat beading along his temple. His chest heaved with uneven breaths. He had swung, he had attempted to intimidate, and yet the man before him, this quiet, unassuming stranger, hadn't flinched. There was no fear, no anger, just a calm authority that radiated from him like heat from the sun. And that calm was terrifying. Steven Seagal adjusted the cuff of his jacket and took a single step backward, not away from confrontation, but in a gesture that made him seem untouchable, almost untouchably human. Every eye in the room followed his movements, some with awe, some with disbelief. Even Donovan's colleagues, who had been watching nervously from the sidelines, felt the shift in atmosphere. The arrogant cop's confidence had been drained in seconds, replaced with something raw and human. Fear. The older clerk at the back, the one who had been quiet throughout the escalating tension, finally broke the spell. His eyes widened, his brow furrowed in recognition. No, it can't be. But it is, he whispered, almost to himself. His voice barely carried across the room. But it was enough. Others began to look at him curiously. Steven Seagal didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Words had already done their work. Authority doesn't always come from noise. But now, with the older clerk's muttered recognition, the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Whispered guesses began circulating among the younger officers. Wait, isn't that? No, it can't be him. Could it really be Steven Seagal? Donovan's head snapped toward them, panic flashing in his eyes. The arrogance that had fueled his actions only moments before now faltered under the weight of growing suspicion. He realized that everyone in the room was connecting dots he had yet to see himself. He wasn't just facing an ordinary man. He was facing someone legendary, someone whose reputation carried weight far beyond the four walls of the precinct. Steven's gaze moved slowly across the room. His calm eyes met Donovan's. No anger, no threat, just clarity. The unspoken truth pressed down on the arrogant officer. He had underestimated the situation entirely. Every gesture, every misstep, had been observed and catalogued. Every ounce of pride had been stripped from him. Piece by piece, the room seemed to shrink further, the murmurs growing louder as realization spread. Phones were raised now, some recording, some live streaming. But no one wanted to miss a moment. The tension was electric. Bystanders on social media would soon see a viral lesson in humility in real time. Donovan's breathing grew erratic. His knees shook slightly. For the first time in his life, he felt exposed in a way no colleague, no superior, no civilian had ever managed to make him feel. Every boast, every smirk, every condescending comment he had ever made seemed to rise up in his mind as a silent indictment. And then came the subtle sound of engines outside, distant at first, then growing nearer. A sleek black car slowed near the precinct doors, and people outside began pointing. Inside, the attention shifted briefly. Some officers pressed their faces against the glass, trying to see what was happening. Others instinctively moved toward the doors, unsure what to expect. Steven remained calm, almost unnervingly so, like a predator aware of every movement around him. Donovan's panic intensified. He looked around, desperate for any ally, any backup, but the only eyes that met his were filled with awe or whispered disbelief. The older clerk was standing straighter now, a knowing look on his face, silently conveying, "This is the man. You have no idea what you just did." The car doors opened outside. A few suited men stepped out, carrying folders, briefcases, and an air of urgency that seemed almost ceremonial. In that instant, the room collectively understood something monumental was about to happen. Donovan's bravado had evaporated entirely. He realized that the swing, the humiliation, the arrogance, it had all been meaningless in the face of someone far above him in status and skill. The officers exchanged glances, some whispering, some shaking their heads, all aware that they were witnessing the prelude to a complete upheaval of power in their precinct. And as the suited men approached, the murmurs crescendoed into full-blown recognition. The legend had arrived. Steven Seagal, silent, calm, commanding, was about to turn the situation upside down. And everyone in that room, including the arrogant officer who had swung first, knew the lesson was about to land in full. The precinct was quiet now, but it wasn't the calm of ordinary work. It was the calm that follows a storm, the kind that leaves a mark long after the skies have cleared. Officers and clerks whispered to each other, replaying the events that had just unfolded. Some stared at the doors Steven Seagal had disappeared through, still expecting him to return. Others turned their eyes to Donovan, who remained kneeling in the center of the room. Shame and fear etched deeply into his face. Donovan's shoulders trembled as he tried to rise. His hands shook, and for the first time, he felt the weight of every arrogant word, every reckless action, every moment he had thought himself untouchable. "Sir, I'm so sorry," he whispered again, voice barely audible. "I didn't know who you were. I was wrong. Please, I'll do anything." The older clerk, now acting as the new branch manager, approached him slowly. There was no anger in his eyes, only a steady, measured look that commanded attention. He knelt slightly to meet Donovan's gaze. "You don't get to undo what happened," he said calmly. "But you do get a choice. Will you learn from this, or will you let arrogance define you forever?" Donovan swallowed hard, his pride shattered. He nodded slowly, his voice cracking. I'll learn. I promise." Around them, the precinct began to regain a sense of order. Officers who had been watching from a distance slowly returned to their desks. Though many still whispered about the events they had witnessed, some nervously laughed, trying to relieve the tension. But the weight of the lesson lingered. Everyone had seen the power of calm authority, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't swing, and yet changes everything. The older clerk straightened, glancing around the room. "From today onward," he said, voice firm but fair, "this precinct will operate differently. Respect will not be assumed, arrogance will not be tolerated, and humility, Humility will be rewarded. He turned to Donovan, who had now fully risen, though his posture remained humble and deferential. You've been given a second chance. Use it wisely. Donovan nodded again, the color returning slightly to his pale face. He felt a strange mixture of relief and continued unease. Relief, because he had survived the encounter without permanent humiliation beyond what his ego had already endured. Unease, because he understood now that respect was not something to be demanded, it was earned. Elsewhere in the precinct, younger officers whispered excitedly about the day's events. Some laughed quietly, others shook their heads in disbelief. I can't believe he was him, one muttered. The legend himself, another officer added. And Donovan. Wow. He got taken down so fast. Never seen anything like it. The lesson rippled beyond the immediate room. Phones recorded the events, videos spread across social media, and colleagues outside the precinct shared the story. Everyone who heard it understood the same truth. Arrogance can lead to instant regret, while patience, composure, and humility carry an unmatched strength. Donovan took a deep breath and walked to the back of the room, approaching the older clerk once more. I want to thank you, he said softly, for showing me what I couldn't see before. I'll do better. The older clerk nodded. Actions speak louder than words. Let your future conduct prove that you've truly learned. The precinct slowly returned to normal, but nothing felt the same. The memory of the calm, measured authority of Steven Seagal lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. The lesson was clear. Power is not in force, and respect is not in fear. Real authority is silent, deliberate, and earned through character, not bluster. And as the day drew to a close, the officers left the precinct with something new. A reminder that humility and respect matter more than any badge, title, or act of intimidation. The arrogant officer had faced his reckoning. The humble had been rewarded. And the story, though quiet now, would echo through the precinct for years to come. In the end, the silent figure of Steven Seagal had left more than a story. He had left a standard. A lesson that would shape how authority and respect were understood long after his departure. The suited men entered the precinct with purpose, their footsteps sharp against the tiled floor, folders and documents clutched tightly in their hands. They moved directly towards Steven Seagal, who stood perfectly still in the center of the room. Every officer and clerk felt the air shift. The tension that had been simmering now reached a boiling point. Donovan's eyes darted from Steven to the men approaching. His confidence eroded completely. The arrogance that had driven him to swing, to humiliate, to assert false authority, now faltered into something far more primal. Fear. He could feel it creeping up his spine. The kind that only comes when you realize you've crossed someone far beyond your comprehension. Sir, one of the executives called, stopping a respectful distance away. We've been waiting for you. Steven's expression remained calm, unreadable, yet commanding. He looked at Donovan once more, his gaze soft but piercing. It wasn't anger. It wasn't malice. It was a quiet, undeniable power, the kind that speaks louder than words. Donovan's head swiveled, his mouth opening in disbelief. Wait, Mr. Seagal? You're... Yes, Steven replied simply. I'm the new majority owner of this precinct and the surrounding administrative district. I came here today for one reason, to deposit some documents, and to observe. His tone was calm even, but carried the weight of authority that made the arrogant officer shrink in place. Gasps erupted from the other officers and clerks. Phones were raised, recording every second of the unfolding drama. Some muttered under their breath, disbelief evident on their faces. He owns this place? Is this real? Holy. Donovan stumbled backward, his face pale. Every ounce of his pride had drained away. The swing, the mocking words, the act of burning the check, all meaningless in an instant. The legend standing before him was not just an expert in martial arts or a celebrity figure. He was the highest authority in the very institution Donovan had thought he controlled. The executives handed folders to Steven, who glanced at them briefly before placing them carefully on the counter. He turned to Donovan. You attempted to humiliate me. You attempted to assert dominance over someone you knew nothing about. And now, you are fully exposed. Donovan swallowed hard, his throat dry. I didn't know. I didn't know it was you," he stammered. The words felt hollow even as they left his lips. He knew it, and everyone else knew it. His arrogance had collapsed under the weight of truth. Steven nodded once, slowly, deliberately. That is exactly the problem. Arrogance blinds perception. It makes one forget respect, forget humility, and assume power where there is none. Today, you learned the lesson the hard way. Whispers spread throughout the room like wildfire. Officers who had once doubted him now looked at Steven with reverence. The older clerk, who had quietly observed from the back, gave a small nod of approval. He had recognized Steven first, and now, he saw the lesson played out perfectly. Steven turned his attention back to the executives. From today onward, we will be making a few changes. Procedures will be updated. Officers will be held accountable for their actions, and respect will no longer be optional. Donovan sank to his knees, trembling, unable to maintain the facade of authority he had clung to for years. "Sir, I am so sorry," he whispered. I didn't know." Steven's gaze softened slightly. "It's not just about knowing, Donovan. It's about understanding. Respect is earned through actions, not authority. And sometimes, humility is the greatest lesson one can learn." He turned to the older clerk, the only one who had remained composed and respectful throughout the ordeal. "You," Steven said, pointing calmly, "have demonstrated the character that this position requires. From today onward, you will take over as acting precinct manager." A collective gasp ran through the room. Donovan's humiliation was complete, but the message was clear. Arrogance has consequences. Humility has rewards. Steven gave one final nod to the entire room, a silent command that carried more weight than any lecture. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. The suited executives followed. Phones were still recording, officers still whispering, and Donovan remained on his knees, staring after the man he had underestimated. The lesson had been delivered, perfectly, silently, and irreversibly. As the doors closed behind him, a hushed awe settled over the precinct. The story of arrogance meeting its match would be whispered for weeks, perhaps months, and everyone who witnessed it knew the moral. True authority is calm, quiet, and earned, not claimed. And most importantly, respect is something that cannot be faked, only demonstrated. The precinct had returned to its normal rhythm, but the atmosphere was forever changed. The day's events had left an imprint on everyone present. From the youngest officer to the seasoned clerks who had seen it all, the arrogance that had once seemed invincible had been humbled. The calm authority that had silently taken control had left a lesson no one would forget. Steven Seagal was gone, but his presence lingered in every corner of the room. The officers could still feel it, the way he had walked in quietly, the way he had observed without reacting, the way his silent power had dismantled arrogance without a single shout. It was a lesson in restraint, discipline, and the quiet strength of humility. The older clerk, now acting as the new branch manager, addressed the room once more. His voice carried calm authority, tempered by fairness and wisdom. Respect isn't something you show because someone is powerful. It's something you show to everyone, especially when no one is watching. Today, we learned that arrogance may feel strong, but it is fragile. Humility, patience, and calmness, those are the true measures of strength. Donovan, sitting quietly at the back, nodded in agreement. He had learned the hard way. Every boast, every attempt at dominance, every careless swing, all had been meaningless in the face of someone who understood power and respect at its core. He finally understood what Steven's silence had conveyed. Authority isn't in the act of aggression. It's in the control, the patience, and the integrity behind the action. Across the precinct, whispers and murmurs reflected a shared understanding. Officers spoke softly to one another, recounting the precise moments that had made them pause. "Did you see how calm he was?" one asked. "Yeah," another replied. "And Donovan, he didn't know what hit him." "It's a lesson for all of us," a third said. "Respect everyone, no matter who they seem to be." Even those who had initially doubted or mocked the situation now acknowledged the truth. The story of arrogance meeting silent authority would be told again and again, a parable for anyone who thought power was in force, rather than character. The older clerk continued, speaking directly to Donovan and everyone in the room. From this day forward, let this be a reminder. True strength is not in intimidation. True power is quiet, deliberate, and earned. Respect is not given because someone demands it. It is given because someone demonstrates it. Donovan exhaled deeply, finally feeling the weight lift slightly from his shoulders. He had faced humiliation, yes, but he had also received the chance to learn. He rose slowly, meeting the gaze of his colleagues with humility he had never shown before. "I understand now," he said softly. "And I will do better." The precinct slowly returned to its routines, but the story would live on. Phones that had captured the moment were shared online, spreading the lesson far beyond the four walls of the building. Videos and whispers alike carried the same message. Arrogance can lead to instant regret, while patience and humility carry a strength no force can match. Steven Seagal had left more than just an unforgettable encounter. He had left a standard, a lesson in respect, authority, and the quiet power of humility. It was a reminder that even when no one seems to be watching, the true character of a person shows, and one day, that character will meet someone who will hold them accountable, not with anger, but with silent authority. Finally, as officers reflected on the events, a collective thought emerged. This wasn't just a story of confrontation. It was a lesson, a principle, and a challenge. How would each of them carry themselves going forward? How would they treat others, colleagues, civilians, or strangers, when no one was looking? And for the viewers hearing this story, the lesson is the same. Respect isn't reserved for the powerful. It's shown to everyone, especially in the moments that seem small, because one day, the person you dismiss might be the one who teaches you your greatest lesson. Type respect in the comments if you agree that humility is real strength. Share where you're watching from. Let's thank every kind soul who understands that true power is silent and true respect is earned.